Why spend thousands on a basic will when you can get access to legal help for around $1 a day? With Legal Shield, you can put a full estate plan in place, including a will, health directives, and powers of attorney to help protect your family and hard-earned assets. Sign up today at LegalShield.com and get 10% off our annual plans. It's finally simple and affordable. Legal Shield. Real lawyers, really affordable. Sign up at LegalShield.com. That's LegalShield.com. Legal Shield does not provide legal representation or advice. See a plan for complete terms.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. In 1951, a film version of George Orwell's Animal Farm was released in cinemas. Orwell had written the novel as a savage satire of Stalinism, a warning about how revolutions betray their own ideals and how totalitarianism disguises itself as liberation. The film adaptation was faithful to that spirit. It was also secretly funded by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA had purchased the rights from Orwell's widow. It had overseen the production, and in a detail that Orwell himself would not have appreciated, it had changed the ending. Orwell's novel ends ambiguously, suggesting that all power corrupts, and that the pigs who took over the farm were indistinguishable from the humans they had replaced. The CIA's version ends with the other animals rising up specifically against the pigs. The message was redirected from a general warning about totalitarianism to a specific call to resist Soviet communism. George Orwell's anti Stalinist allegory had been turned into a CIA propaganda film. Our history brief today looks at some myth versus reality and whether the pirates were really like we see them in the movies. A quick word from our sponsors.
Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's room of choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This day in history. On June 27, 1950, President Harry S. Truman ordered American forces into the Korean War under the banner of the United Nations, marking one of the first major military actions of the Cold War. On June 27, 1985, Route 66 was officially removed from the U.S. highway system. Though no longer an official highway, it remains an enduring symbol of American travel, freedom, and the open road. Story of the day. The relationship between Hollywood and the United States government during the Cold War operated on two simultaneous tracks. The first track was coercive. The House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, had been investigating alleged communist influence in American institutions since the 1930s. But its assault on Hollywood began in earnest in 1947, when the committee summoned a series of writers, directors, and actors to testify about communist infiltration of the film industry. Most of those summoned cooperated. They named names, identifying colleagues and friends as current or former members of the Communist Party, giving the committee what it wanted in exchange for their own professional survival. But 10 of those summoned, the Hollywood 10 as they became known, refused. Dalton Trumbo, John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Ring Lerner Jr., and 6 others. They invoked the First Amendment rights and refused to answer the committee's questions about their political beliefs and associations. They were cited for contempt of Congress. They were sentenced to prison. And they were blacklisted, their names placed on an informal but effectively enforced list that made them unemployable in Hollywood. The blacklist that followed the HUAC investigations destroyed careers, ended friendships, and forced some of the most talented writers and directors in American cinema underground. At its peak, the blacklist contained hundreds of names. Some of those named had been Communist Party members. Some had attended meetings years earlier out of curiosity or political idealism. Some were named by vindictive colleagues for reasons that had nothing to do with politics. The standard of evidence required to destroy a career was essentially zero. An accusation was sufficient. A refusal to cooperate was treated as confirmation of guilt. The human cost was staggering. Dalton Trumbo, one of the most gifted screenwriters in Hollywood history, continued to work during the blacklist years under assumed names and through frontmen who submitted his scripts on his behalf. He won an Academy Award in 1956 for The Brave One under the pseudonym Robert Rich. He then won another, posthumously acknowledged, for Roman Holiday in 1953, the credit originally given to a front. The most honored screenwriter of the blacklist era was being paid a fraction of his normal rate, working in secret, and could not claim the awards his own work was winning. The second track, the Hollywood government relationship, was considerably less coercive. It was willing. The Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, a Hollywood organization founded in 1944, was a voluntary association of industry figures committed to anti communism and cooperation with government investigators. Its members included John Wayne, Gary Cooper, Walt Disney, and Ronald Reagan, then president of the Screen Actors Guild. They were not men being pressured. They believed in what they were doing. They named names voluntarily. They supported HUAC enthusiastically. They helped, they helped shape an industry culture in which anti communism was not merely a political position, but a professional survival strategy. And then came the CIA. The Animal Farm operation was not an isolated case. The CIA's covert cultural program, eventually revealed through declassified documents and investigative journalism, extended far beyond Hollywood. Through an organization called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the CIA secretly funded art exhibitions, literary magazines, music festivals, and academic conferences across Europe, all designed to demonstrate the vitality and freedom of Western culture against Soviet cultural propaganda. In Hollywood specifically, the CIA worked to encourage films that portrayed American values favorably and Soviet communism unfavorably, sometimes through direct involvement, as with Animal Farm, and sometimes through more subtle channels of influence. The 1952 film High Noon, in which a lone sheriff stands against a mob while the townspeople refuse to help, was read by some as an allegory for HUAC and the blacklist, with the townspeople representing the cowardice of those who cooperated. Its screenwriter, Carl Foreman, was called before HUAC during production and then subsequently blacklisted. The film, however, won 4 Academy Awards. Its meaning was contested from the moment that it was released, and it remains so to this day. What the Cold War did to Hollywood was something more insidious than simply producing propaganda films. It shaped what could be made. Stories that questioned American institutions, that examined racial injustice, that portrayed labor organizing sympathetically, that suggested the world was more complicated than the binary of freedom versus communism. These were stories that carried risk in the late 1940s and 1950s. Writers and directors who wanted to work learned quickly what kinds of stories were safe. The self censorship that resulted was arguably more damaging to American cinema than any specific blacklist. The films that were never made, the scripts that were never written, the voices that were silenced before they could speak. These are absences the historical record cannot fully document. What we can document is that when the blacklist finally began to crumble in the early 1960s, When Dalton Trumbo's name was restored to the credits of Spartacus and Exodus, something that had been held under pressure for 15 years began to breathe again. The films that emerged from Hollywood in the late 1960s and 1970s, cynical, questioning, formally adventurous, willing to examine the darkest corners of American life, were made by a generation that had watched what happened to the people who came before them. They were determined not to be afraid. The History Brief. When most people picture a pirate, they imagine a very specific character: a peg leg, a hook for a hand, a parrot on the shoulder, a treasure map marked with a giant X, and probably someone will then yell, "Arr!" It's a fun image. It's also mostly fiction. The real pirates of the so called Golden Age of piracy, roughly between 1650 and 1730, were very different from the swashbuckling adventurers we've come to know through movies and novels. Let's start with the treasure. Thanks to stories like Treasure Island, many people assume pirates spend their lives burying chests of gold on some remote islands. In reality, pirates almost never buried treasure. Most pirate crews spend their loot as quickly as they got it. Gold, silver, food, alcohol, clothing, weapons, and trade goods were divided among the crew and used almost immediately. The famous buried treasure trope is largely a creation of fiction. Then there are the eye patches, hooks, and peg legs. Did they exist? Yeah, absolutely. Life at sea was dangerous. Accidents, battles, disease, and primitive medical care meant that injuries were common. Some pirates undoubtedly lost limbs or eyes. The difference is that not every pirate looked like they had wandered off the set of a costume party. Those injuries were memorable because they were unusual, not because everyone had them. And what about walking the plank? Perhaps the most famous pirate punishment in history? Well, the problem? There's surprisingly very little evidence that it happened very often. Real pirates were generally more practical. If they wanted to punish or kill someone, they were far more likely to maroon them on an island, beat them, or simply throw them overboard. Walking the plank makes for great cinema. It's just not something pirates seem to have regularly done. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. In some ways, pirate ships were actually more democratic than many governments of their time. Captains were often elected by their crews. Loot was distributed according to agreed upon rules. Some pirate crews even had written codes outlining compensation for injuries and standards of conduct. Compared to the rigid hierarchies found on merchant ships or in European navies, pirate life could offer sailors an unusual degree of freedom and participation. That's not to say pirates were heroes. Far from it. They stole, kidnapped, extorted, and killed. The reality was often violent and brutal. But they weren't simply chaotic criminals either. Many pirate crews operated according to surprisingly structured systems because cooperation was essential for survival. And then there's the famous pirate accent, the classic "arr, matey" that everyone associates with pirates today. That mostly comes from actor Robert Newton, who portrayed Long John Silver in film adaptations during the 1950s. His West Country English accent became so iconic that it essentially invented the modern pirate voice. So, what's the reality? Pirates were not the romantic adventurers of Hollywood, but they also weren't exactly the cartoon villains either. They were sailors operating on the edges of empires, taking advantage of weak governments, global trade routes, and opportunities for profit in an increasingly connected world. The real story is less about treasure maps and parrots, and more about economics, empire, and survival, which admittedly doesn't fit quite as nicely on a movie poster. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you are enjoying this show and would like to help with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad free. Both links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. And also don't forget to check out our YouTube channel where we have different videos and series that are not part of this main feed. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.